He thought his billions bought him the right to be cruel. He thought the uniform she wore made her invisible, just another piece of furniture in the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. When Preston Holloway, the ruthless tech mogul, decided to impress his business partners by humiliating his waitress, ordering his meal in a rapid, obscure dialect of distinct aristocratic French that only the elite would know, he expected her to crumble. He expected tears. He expected to get her fired. But he didn't know who she really was. He didn't know that the woman pouring his water wasn't just a waitress. She was the only person in the room who knew his darkest secret. And when she opened her mouth to reply, she didn't just take his order. She took his dignity. This is the story of how one sentence destroyed a billionaire's ego. The Obsidian Room wasn't just a restaurant. It was a theater of wealth. Located on the 54th floor of a glass needle piercing the Manhattan skyline, it was the kind of place where a bottle of wine cost more than a Honda Civic, and the napkins were made of Egyptian cotton, so soft it felt like a sin to wipe your mouth with them. For Katie Miller, however, the Obsidian Room was a battlefield. At 24 years old, Katie had mastered the art of becoming invisible. It was a requirement for the job. The wealthy patrons who dined here didn't want to see a person. They wanted a ghost who delivered Wagyu beef and refilled crystal glasses before they were even empty. Katie was good at it. She kept her head down, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that gave her a headache by 8 p.m., and her expression neutral. Table 4 needs a refresh on the sparkling Katie. "Move," whispered Henri, the floor manager. Henri was a short, perspiring man who treated the waitstaff like unexploded ordnance. He was terrified of the clientele, and he projected that terror downward. "On it," Katie said, her voice barely a murmur. She grabbed a chilled bottle of San Pellegrino and moved through the dining room. Her feet ached. They throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pain that traveled up her shins. She was working a double shift, her third this week. The rent on her tiny studio apartment in Queens was 2 weeks late, and her mother's medical bills were piling up on the kitchen counter like snowdrifts. Every shift at the Obsidian Room was a gamble. If she got a good table, the tips could pay for her mum's medication for a month. If she got a bad table, or worse, a cruel one, she could walk away with nothing but sore feet and a bruised ego. Tonight, the air in the restaurant felt different. It was sharper, tenser. "He's here," someone whispered near the service station. Katie paused, glancing at Jessica, another server who looked like she was about to hyperventilate. "Who?" "Preston Holloway." Jessica hissed, her eyes wide. "He just walked in. The host stand is in a panic. He didn't have a reservation, but he demanded the corner booth. You know, the one with the view of the Empire State Building." Katie's stomach tightened. Everyone knew Preston Holloway. He was the face of Aura Tech, a company that had swallowed half of Silicon Valley in the last 5 years. He was young, barely 32, with a net worth that hovered in the 11-figure range. But in the service industry, he wasn't known for his innovation. He was known for being a nightmare. The Holloway horror stories were legendary in New York. He once had a waiter fired for pouring wine with his left hand. He allegedly threw a plate of risotto at a wall because the saffron wasn't aromatic enough. "Who's taking him?" Katie asked, praying it wasn't her. Henry appeared beside them, looking pale. He was clutching a tablet so hard his knuckles were white. He looked at Jessica, then at Katie. Jessica was shaking. Katie was tired, but her hands were steady. "Miller," Henry said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You're up. Jessica will drop the silverware, but you take the order. You handle the wine. You handle him." "Henri, I took the senator's table last night," Katie protested quietly. "Can't David take him?" David is on break and Holloway is sitting now. Henry snapped. Don't screw this up, Katie. He's with 3 others. Investors from Europe, I think. He's going to be showing off. Just be invisible. Do exactly what he says. Do not speak unless spoken to. Katie took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her black waistcoat. She could feel the exhaustion in her bones, a heavy weight dragging her down, but she forced her spine straight. She had to do this. For the rent. For her mom. Yes, Henri. She walked out onto the floor, navigating the sea of velvet and mahogany. She saw him immediately. Preston Holloway was sitting in the prime corner booth, taking up more space than one man should. He was undeniably handsome in a predatory way. Sharp jawline hair swept back with expensive product, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than Katie would earn in 10 years. He was laughing loudly, a sound that cut through the hushed murmur of the dining room. Seated with him were 3 older men. They looked serious, grey-haired, and expensive. They were clearly the audience Preston was performing for. As Katie approached the table, Preston stopped laughing instantly. His eyes, cold and blue, like glacial ice, flicked toward her. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her shoes, then her apron, then, dismissively, scanned the room as if looking for someone important. Good evening, gentlemen. Katie said, her voice practiced and polite. Welcome to the Obsidian Room. My name is Katie, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with some... Preston held up a hand, silencing her. He didn't even look at her. He continued talking to the man on his right, a heavy-set fellow with a thick German accent. So I told the board if you want the acquisition to go through, you cut the dead weight. It's simple biology. Survival of the fittest. Preston smirked. Katie stood there frozen. The waiter's pause. It was a power play. He knew she was there. He wanted her to stand there awkward and subservient until he decided to acknowledge her existence. She counted the seconds in her head. 1, 2, 3, 10. Finally, Preston turned his head, slowly looking at her with an expression of mild disgust. Water, he said, sparkling. No ice. And bring the wine list. The reserve list, not the one you give to the tourists. Of course, sir, Katie said, keeping her face blank. And? Preston added his voice, dropping to a sneer. Try to be quicker than you look. We have a timeline. Right away. Katie turned and walked away, feeling his eyes drilling into her back. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a simmering hot anger she had learned to suppress years ago. She went to the service bar, grabbed the heavy leather-bound reserve list, and signaled for the sommelier. He's going to be one of those, she whispered to herself. She had no idea. He wasn't just going to be one of those. Tonight, Preston Holloway wasn't just hungry for dinner. He was hungry for blood. By the time the appetizers arrived, the tension at table 4 was thick enough to choke on. Katie had managed to pour the wine, a 1982 Chateau Margaux, that cost $4,000 without spilling a drop, despite Preston criticizing the way she held the bottle. You're gripping the neck like it's a beer bottle, he had sneered in front of his guests. Where do they find these people? A temp agency. The guests, the 3 European investors, had chuckled nervously. They seemed uncomfortable with Preston's aggression, but they were clearly too interested in his money to defend the help. They were playing a game of high-stakes poker, and Preston was the dealer. Katie had taken the abuse in silence. She apologized, adjusted her grip, and poured. Invisible, she reminded herself. Be a ghost. Now it was time for the main course. This was the most dangerous part of the service. The Obsidian Room's menu was complex, featuring dishes with ingredients sourced from specific microclimates around the world. It required explanation. It required dialogue. Katie approached the table with her notepad. "Are we ready to order the main course, gentlemen?" she asked softly. The oldest of the guests, a man named Mr. Weber, smiled kindly at her. "Yes, thank you. I think I will have the halibut, please." "Excellent choice," Katie said, writing it down. The second and third guests ordered the filet mignon and the duck breast. Standard safe choices. Then she turned to Preston. He was leaning back in the leather booth, swirling his wine, staring at her with a look of predatory amusement. He had clearly been drinking faster than the others. His cheeks were slightly flushed, and his eyes had a dangerous glint. He wanted to show these European investors that he was a man of the world, cultured, sophisticated, and dominant. And the easiest way to display dominance was to crush someone beneath him. He closed the menu with a sharp snap. "Tell me," Preston said, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "do you actually know what you're serving, or do you just memorize the words Henry tells you to say? 'I am very familiar with the menu, sir,'" Katie replied, her voice steady. "Good." Preston smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Because I'm in the mood for something specific, and since my guests here are from the old country, I think we should order in a language that befits the cuisine, don't you?" The investors looked at each other confused. Preston leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He looked directly into Katie's eyes. "I assume, given the exorbitant prices of this establishment, that the staff is educated. We try our best, sir. Let's see." Preston took a breath. Then, without breaking eye contact, he began to speak. He didn't speak English. He didn't speak the standard French that most high-end waiters knew how to navigate, coq au vin, or mise en place. He spoke rapidly, aggressively in French. But it wasn't modern, conversational French. It was rapid-fire, highly technical, and laced with an archaic aristocratic syntax that was rarely heard outside of 19th-century literature or very old-money Parisian drawing rooms. It was the kind of language used to exclude people to make them feel small and uneducated. "Je désire que le chef prépare le riz de veau, mais faites attention. Je l'exige, braisé lentement, non pas sauté avec une réduction de vin de Madère, et si la texture est, ne serait-ce qu'un peu caoutchouteuse, je renverrai le plat et je m'assurerai que vous soyez renvoyé avec." Translation: "I desire that the chef prepares the sweetbreads, but pay attention. I demand it, slow braised, not sautéed with a Madeira wine reduction, and if the texture is even slightly rubbery, I will send the dish back and ensure you are sent back with it." He finished the sentence with a smirk, leaning back and crossing his arms. The table went silent. The investors looked at Katie with pity. They knew what he had done. He had used a complex grammatical structure and specific culinary demands delivered at a native speed to trip her up. He wanted her to say, "Excuse me," or "Could you repeat that in English?" He wanted the pleasure of sighing, looking at his partners and saying, "You see, you can't get good help in America." The silence stretched. 1 second. 2 seconds. Preston let out a short, mocking laugh. "Too fast for you. Should I use smaller words, or maybe draw you a picture?" Katie looked down at her notepad. Then slowly she looked up. Her expression had changed. The submissive, invisible waitress was gone. In her place was something colder, something sharper. Her eyes, usually a warm hazel, seemed to darken. She didn't look at Henry, who was watching from the sidelines in terror. She didn't look at the pitying investors. She looked right at Preston Holloway. Katie had a secret that Preston Holloway couldn't possibly have known, because he didn't bother to read the resumes of people he considered the help. Katie wasn't just a waitress. She was a doctoral candidate at Columbia University, her field of study comparative linguistics with a specialization in 18th-century European dialects. She didn't just speak French. She studied the evolution of the language. She knew the syntax he was using better than he did. In fact, she recognized that he had made a grammatical error in his subjunctive conjugation, a mistake common among Americans who learned French at expensive boarding schools, but never actually lived in France. She decided in that split second that the tip didn't matter. The job didn't matter. She took a small step forward. She didn't smile. "Monsieur," she began, and then she opened her mouth. She spoke, but she didn't just repeat his order back to him. She replied in French. But not just French. She slipped into a hyper-formal elevated register, known as soutenu, specifically used by the serving class to address nobility in the royal courts of the past, a dialect that was deferential on the surface, but intellectually superior in structure. It was the linguistic equivalent of a bow that was actually a slap in the face. "Monsieur Holloway," she said, her French flawless, her accent indistinguishable from a native Parisian aristocrat. "Votre demande pour les riz de veau braisés a été notée. Cependant, je me dois de vous corriger sur un point technique. Translation. Mr. Holloway, your request for the braised sweetbreads has been noted. However, I must correct you on a technical point." The investor's head snapped up. Preston's smirk faltered. She continued, her voice gaining strength, echoing slightly in the hushed dining room. "Si vous désirez une réduction de madère, le braisage rendrait la sauce trop amère en raison de la teneur en sucre. Le chef suggérerait un poêlage pour préserver l'intégrité du goût. De plus," she paused, allowing a small icy smile to touch her lips. "Quand vous utilisez le subjonctif après exiger, Monsieur la concordance des temps demande l'imparfait du subjonctif dans ce contexte classique, pas le présent. Vous avez dit « soir », mais un homme de votre prétendu niveau d'éducation aurait dû dire « fut ». Mais ne vous inquiétez pas, je dirai au chef de faire de son mieux pour accommoder votre palais américain. Translation. If you desire a Madeira, reduction braising would make the sauce too bitter due to the sugar content. The chef would suggest pan frying to preserve the integrity of the taste. Furthermore, when you use the subjunctive after demand, so the sequence of tenses requires the imperfect subjunctive in this classic context, not the present. You said saw it, but a man of your alleged level of education should have said fut. But do not worry. I will tell the chef to do his best to accommodate your American palate. Silence. Absolute crushing silence. Mr. Weber, the German investor, let out a loud, sudden bark of laughter. He quickly covered his mouth, but his eyes were dancing with delight. Preston Holloway sat frozen. His face went from flushed to pale to a deep, blotchy red. He had tried to humiliate her with his boarding school French, and she had just publicly corrected his grammar and his culinary knowledge in front of the very people he was trying to impress. Katie closed her notepad with a soft click. "Will there be anything else, monsieur?" she asked, switching back to English, her voice sweet and innocent. Preston opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish pulled out of water. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. Because as Katie turned to walk away, shaking with adrenaline, she didn't notice the man sitting at the table directly behind Preston. A man who had been watching the entire exchange. A man who was about to change Katie's life forever and perhaps ruin Preston's. The double doors of the kitchen swung shut behind Katie, cutting off the hushed opulence of the dining room and replacing it with the roar of the service line. The contrast was physical. Out there, it was air-conditioned, silence, crystal, and velvet. In here, it was stainless steel steam and the aggressive shouting of orders. "Table 7, pick up. 2 halibuts, 1 risotto, the expediter screamed. Katie walked to the server station, her legs suddenly feeling like water. The adrenaline that had fueled her linguistic riposte was draining away, leaving a cold, shaking void in its wake. She gripped the edge of the stainless steel counter, her knuckles white. She had done it. She had actually done it. Katie... It was Jessica. She was holding a tray of dirty martini glasses, her eyes wide, with a mixture of horror and awe. I saw that. Everyone saw that. You just corrected Preston Holloway's grammar. Katie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. He was wrong. He used the present subjunctive. It required the imperfect. Jessica stared at her. Katie, he's worth $20 billion. He doesn't have to use grammar. He buys the dictionary and rewrites it. He was trying to humiliate me. Katie whispered, her voice trembling. I couldn't take it. Not tonight. Before Jessica could reply, the kitchen doors flew open. Henry burst in. He wasn't walking. He was practically vibrating. His face, usually a pale shade of worried beige, was now a blotchy crimson. He scanned the kitchen frantically until his eyes locked on Katie. He marched over, ignoring the chefs shouting for runners. "Miller!" Henry choked out. He looked like he was about to cry. "What did you do? What did you do? I took his order." "Henry," Katie said, straightening her back. She refused to cower. "Not anymore." "You embarrassed him," Henry hissed, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper so the executive chef wouldn't hear. I was watching from the podium. Mr. Weber was laughing. The investors were laughing at him. Do you know what happens when a man like Preston Holloway gets laughed at? He doesn't get sad, Katie. He gets even. He was abusive, Katie said calmly. He treated me like I was stupid because of the uniform I wear. I simply showed him that I wasn't. Henry ran a hand through his thinning hair. This isn't a university debate club, Katie. This is the Obsidian Room. We sell servitude. We sell the illusion that they are gods. And we are nothing. You just shattered the illusion. Henry's earpiece buzzed. He froze, pressing his hand against his ear. His eyes went wide. "Yes, Mr. Holloway," Henry said into the microphone, his voice trembling. "Yes, immediately. I understand. No, sir. Yes, right away." Henry pulled the earpiece out and looked at Katie. The anger in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow defeat. "He wants to see me," Henry said, "at the table. And he says if I don't give him exactly what he wants, he's going to buy the building and turn this restaurant into a parking garage for his employees." Henry turned and walked back toward the dining room doors, looking like a man walking to the gallows. Katie stood there, the noise of the kitchen fading into a dull buzz. She knew what was coming. She thought of her mother lying in bed in their cramped apartment, counting out pills to make them last longer. She thought of the eviction notice tucked into the junk drawer. She had won the battle of wits, but she was about to lose the war of survival. Meanwhile, back in the dining room, the atmosphere at table 4 had curdled. The food hadn't arrived yet, but the appetite was gone. Mr. Feber and the other investors were making polite, quiet conversation, studiously avoiding eye contact with Preston. They were embarrassed for him, which was the worst kind of insult. Preston Holloway sat in silence. He was tearing a bread roll apart, piece by piece, dropping the crumbs onto the pristine white tablecloth. He wasn't eating it. He was destroying it. His ego, a fragile construct built on money and fear, had been pricked. If Katie had spilled soup on him, he would have yelled. If she had been rude, he would have fired her. But she had been smarter than him. She had exposed his pretension. He looked up, his eyes scanning the room. He felt like everyone was looking at him. 2 tables away, in a dimly lit booth near the window, A man was looking at him. The man was older, perhaps, in his late 60s. He had a shock of silver hair and a face lined with the kind of deep grooves that come from a lifetime of hard decisions. He was dining alone. No phone, no tablet, no guests. Just a bottle of Pinot Noir and a leather-bound notebook. His name was Michael Sterling. Most people in the restaurant didn't notice Michael. He didn't radiate the aggressive, look-at-me wealth of men like Preston. His suit was expensive, but understated. He wore no watch. He ate slowly, savoring every bite. But Michael noticed everything. He had watched the entire exchange. He had seen Preston's arrogance. He had heard the rapid-fire French. And he had seen the waitress, the girl with the tired eyes and the straight spine, destroy the billionaire with a few sentences of grammatical perfection. Michael took a sip of his wine, a faint, unreadable smile playing on his lips. He turned the page of his notebook and wrote down a single line in fountain pen. Integrity is often found in the places we least expect it. He watched as Henri, the sweating manager, approached Preston's table. Michael closed his notebook. The show wasn't over. The second act was just beginning, and he had a feeling it was going to be ugly. Henri stood by table 4, wringing his hands. "Mr. Holloway, is there something wrong with the service?" Preston didn't look up from the bread he was shredding. "The service," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "is non-existent. The service implies that I am being served. What I just experienced was insubordination." "I apologize deeply, sir," Henri stammered. She has been under a lot of stress. It won't happen again." "You're right, it won't," Preston said. He finally looked up. His eyes were dead. "Because she's fired." Henri nodded quickly. "Of course. I will send her home immediately. I'll assign David to your table. He's our senior." "No." Preston interrupted. The single word hung in the air like a blade. "Sir, I don't want you to just send her home." "Henri," Preston said, leaning back and picking up his wine glass. "That's too easy. She thinks she's clever. She thinks she's better than her station. I want her to understand her place." Mr. Weber cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Preston, perhaps we should just let it go. The girl was disrespectful to you, Hans." Preston lied smoothly, turning to the investor. "She mocked my attempt to order a meal that would honor your culture. I cannot allow my guests to be insulted." He turned back to Henri. "Bring her out here." Henri blinked. "Out here, sir, usually when we let staff go. We do it in the office to avoid a scene." "I want a scene," Preston said coldly. "Bring her here. I want her to apologize to me and to my guests in front of the entire room. I want her to admit she was wrong. I want her to say that she doesn't know what she's talking about." "And if she refuses?" Henri asked weakly. Preston smiled, a shark sensing blood. "You know I own the holding company that insures this restaurant chain, don't you, Henri? If she doesn't come out here and apologize, I'll pull your coverage tomorrow. Your premiums will triple. This place will be bankrupt by Christmas. And you, Henri, you'll never work in this city again." Henri's face went grey. It wasn't an idle threat. Preston Holloway had destroyed companies for less. I will get her." Henri walked back to the kitchen like a zombie. He pushed through the doors and found Katie near the dish pit, scraping plates. "Katie," he said, his voice hollow. She looked up. She saw the look on his face, and she knew. She wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm fired, aren't I? It's okay, Henri. I understand. I'll get my things." "No," Henri said. He couldn't look her in the eye. He wants you to come to the table." "What? He wants a public apology. Now?" Katie froze. "Henri, I can't do that. He was the one who—" "I know." Henri snapped, tears finally forming in his eyes. I know he's a monster, but Katie, he threatened the restaurant. He threatened me. He's going to ruin us all if you don't do this. Please, just go out there, say you're sorry, and leave. Please. Katie looked at Henri. She saw a middle-aged man who was terrified of losing his livelihood. She looked around the kitchen at the line, cooks, the dishwashers, the other servers. They all had families. They all needed this job. If she refused, she kept her pride. But everyone else paid the price. A heavy, suffocating weight settled on her chest. This was the reality of the world. The rich didn't just win. They made sure you lost everything. Okay, Katie whispered. Her voice sounded dead to her own ears. Okay, Henri. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. Then she walked back out onto the floor. The dining room had gone quiet. Word spreads fast in high-end restaurants. Guests at other tables had sensed the tension. The air was thick with anticipation. Katie walked toward table 4. Every step felt like walking through wet cement. Her face burned. She could feel the eyes of 50 people boring into her. She felt small. She felt dirty. She stopped at the edge of the table. Preston Holloway was waiting. He didn't stand up. He swirled his wine, looking at her with a look of supreme satisfaction. Well, Preston said. Katie clasped her hands in front of her. She forced herself to look at him, but her vision was blurry with unshed tears. Mr. Holloway, she began, her voice shaking slightly. I want to apologize. Louder, Preston said. I can't hear you, and neither can the rest of the room. Katie swallowed the lump in her throat. She raised her voice. I want to apologize for my behavior earlier. It was unprofessional. And, Preston prodded, you were wrong, weren't you? You don't actually know French better than I do. You were just trying to be smart. Katie's fingernails dug into her palms. This was the lie. This was the part that broke her. She could apologize for her tone, but to apologize for the truth. Say it, Preston hissed. Katie stuttered. Say, I am just a waitress, and I don't know what I'm talking about. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The investors looked down at their plates, ashamed. Katie took a breath. She looked at Henry, who was pleading with her with his eyes. She looked at Preston's smirk. She opened her mouth to say the words that would crush her soul. Clink, clink, clink. The sound of a spoon tapping against a crystal glass rang out through the silent room. It was sharp, clear, and authoritative. Everyone turned. At the small table near the window, the solitary man, Michael Sterling, had placed his spoon down. He stood up slowly. He was not a large man, but he stood with a posture that commanded instant attention. He picked up his napkin, dabbed his mouth, and dropped it on the table. Then he began to walk toward table 4. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, heavy. He didn't look at Katie. He looked directly at Preston Holloway. Preston frowned. Can we help you? This is a private conversation. Michael stopped at the table. He looked down at Preston, his expression unreadable, his eyes like flint. Private, Michael said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and carried a tone of authority that made Preston's skin crawl. You are screaming at a young woman in the middle of a crowded room, boy. There is nothing private about your lack of class. Preston's face flushed. Excuse me, do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are. Preston, Michael said calmly. I knew your father. He was a shark, but at least he had manners. He didn't get his kicks by pulling the wings off flies. Preston stood up now, trying to use his height to intimidate the older man. Listen, old man, I don't know who you think you are, but I'll have security throw you out. I'm in the middle of a business dinner. Is that what this is? Michael glanced at the investors. Gentlemen, is this the man you are planning to trust with your capital? A man who needs to bully a 20-year-old girl to feel powerful? Mr. Weber looked at Michael, and his eyes widened. He suddenly recognized the older man. His jaw dropped slightly. Wait, Mr. Weber whispered. You are Herr Sterling. Michael ignored him for a moment. He turned his gaze to Katie. His face softened. Mademoiselle, Michael said gently. You do not need to apologize to him. Your French was impeccable. The use of the imperfect subjunctive was indeed the mark of a classical education. It was beautiful to hear. Katie stared at him, tears finally spilling over. Thank you, she whispered. Michael turned back to Preston. The softness was gone. You asked her to say she doesn't know what she's talking about, Michael said. But I think, Preston, it is you who needs a lesson in reality. Get lost, Preston sneered. Henry, get this guy out of here. Henry didn't move. He was staring at Michael Sterling with the same look of recognition that Mr. Weber had. Henri isn't going to help you, Michael said. He reached into his jacket pocket. Preston flinched as if expecting a weapon, but Michael simply pulled out a phone. He tapped the screen once, then held it to his ear. It's Michael, he said into the phone. The room was so quiet everyone could hear him. Yes, I'm at the Obsidian Room. I'm looking at the lease agreement for the building. Who holds the commercial note? Ah, Vanguard Holdings. Good. Preston laughed nervously. What are you doing? Calling your lawyer? Michael ignored him. Yes, buy it. No, not the restaurant. The building, the tower. Yes, all of it. Make the offer now. Cash. Double the asking price if you have to just get the ink dry in 10 minutes. He hung up the phone and looked at Preston. What? What is that supposed to mean? Preston asked, his voice wavering slightly. It means, Michael said, checking his watch, that in about 10 minutes I will own the roof over your head. And I have a very strict policy about the kind of tenants I allow in my buildings. Preston scoffed. You're bluffing. You can't just buy a Manhattan skyscraper over dinner. Michael smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Preston, look at your German friend. Ask him if I bluff. Preston turned to Mr. Weber. The German investor was pale. Preston, Weber whispered. That is Michael Sterling. He founded Sterling and Company. He essentially owns the European banking system. Preston's knees buckled. He fell back into his booth. Michael Sterling turned to Katie. My dear, he said, do you have your coat? Yes, Katie said. Get it, Michael said. You're done working for tonight. We have some business to discuss. The dining room of the Obsidian Room felt like it had been depressurized. The air was thin, sharp, and electric. Preston Holloway was still slumped in the leather booth, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked at Michael Sterling, then at his phone, then back at Michael. His brain, usually a computer designed for hostile takeovers and market manipulation, was misfiring. You can't do that. Preston muttered, his voice lacking its usual baritone boom. Real estate deals take months, due diligence, inspections. You can't just buy a skyscraper during the appetizer course. Michael Sterling didn't answer immediately. He reached into his breast pocket and retrieved a heavy silver cigarette case. He didn't take out a cigarette, smoking was prohibited, but he ran his thumb over the etched metal, a grounding habit. Preston, Michael said softly, you mistake money for power. You have money. You have a lot of it. But you have no relationships. You have no respect. When I call the chairman of Vanguard Holdings at 8:30 p.m. or on a Tuesday, he picks up because I godfathered his children. He trusts my word. If I say the money is wired, the money is wired. A soft ping echoed from the center of the table. It came from Mr. Weber's phone. The German investor picked it up, frowned, and tapped the screen. His eyes widened. He looked up at his two colleagues, then at Preston. "It is on the newswire," Weber said, his voice flat. Bloomberg just flashed it. "Vanguard Holdings announces immediate sale of the Obsidian Tower to Sterling Trust for undisclosed sum." Preston snatched his own phone. His thumb flew across the screen. There it was, the headline that sealed his fate. The color drained from his face completely. He wasn't just embarrassed. He was evicted. Michael turned to Henry, the terrified manager, who was still hovering nearby, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the carpet. "Henry," Michael said. Yes, Mr. Sterling," Henry squeaked. "This is now my building," Michael said, gesturing around the room. "And while I generally leave the management of my tenants to my team, I am making an executive decision regarding tonight's service." "Anything, sir." "Mr. Holloway is leaving," Michael said, "and he is taking his negative energy with him. Please clear his table." "You can't kick me out," Preston shouted, standing up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, a jarring screech that made diners flinch. "I have a reservation. I have rights. You have nothing?" Michael said, his voice dropping to a register that was terrifyingly calm. "You threatened to destroy this man's livelihood," he pointed at Henri, "and you tried to humiliate a brilliant young woman for sport. You are a trespasser on my property. Leave or I will have the NYPD remove you, and I assure you the press photographers are already downstairs." Preston looked around. He looked at Mr. Weber. "Hans." Preston pleaded, desperate for an ally. "We have a deal. We have the merger. Don't listen to this dinosaur." "Mister." Weber stood up slowly. He wiped his mouth with his napkin and placed it on the table. He looked at Preston with a mixture of disappointment and disdain. "There is no merger, Preston," Weber said heavily. "My board gave me specific instructions to evaluate your character. We know your technology is good, but we needed to know if you were stable." Weber gestured to Katie, who was standing beside Michael, clutching her coat like a shield. "A man who kicks those beneath him will eventually kick his partners," Weber said. "We do not do business with children." Weber nodded to the other two investors. "Come, gentlemen. I believe there is a steakhouse down the street where the atmosphere is less toxic." The three investors walked away without looking back. Preston stood alone. His audience was gone. His deal was dead. His ego was shattered. He looked at Katie. For a fleeting second, she saw pure, unadulterated hatred in his eyes. It was the look of a man who would burn the world down rather than admit he was wrong. "You," Preston hissed at her. "You did this. You think this is over. You're a waitress. I can buy your whole life. I will make sure you never—" "That's enough." Michael stepped in front of Katie, blocking Preston's view. "Henry, call security." Preston straightened his jacket. He tried to summon one last shred of dignity. "I'm leaving. I don't need your security." He stormed toward the exit, his footsteps heavy and angry. As he passed the other tables, people didn't look away. They watched him go. They watched the billionaire Auratech mogul walk out in disgrace, defeated by a linguistics student and an old man with a notebook. When the elevator doors dinged and swallowed, Preston Holloway, a collective sigh went through the room. Henry looked at Katie. He looked ashamed. "Katie," Henry began, I didn't want to—" "I know, Henry," Katie said softly. She felt incredibly tired. The adrenaline was crashing. "You were scared. He's a scary man." "You're not fired," Henry said quickly. "Please, take the night off. Take the week off. Paid. Just, please don't quit." Katie looked around the restaurant. She looked at the velvet, the crystal, the people returning to their meals as if nothing had happened. She realized with a sudden clarity that she didn't belong here. Not because she wasn't good enough, but because she was too good for this. "I'll let you know, Henri," she said. She felt a hand on her elbow. It was gentle, respectful. "Come," Michael said. "Let's get some fresh air. It smells like ozone and ego in here." The night air of Manhattan was crisp and cold, a welcome relief after the stifling heat of the kitchen and the dining room. Katie stood on the sidewalk outside the skyscraper, hugging her thin coat around herself. Her hands were still shaking. Traffic hummed by on the Avenue yellow taxis, black town cars, the endless river of light that was New York City. Michael Sterling stood next to her. He didn't say anything for a long time. He simply breathed in the city air, watching the people rush by. "I'm sorry," Katie said, breaking the silence. "I didn't mean to cause a scene. I usually just take it. I don't know why I snapped tonight." "You didn't snap, my dear," Michael said, turning to look at her. Under the streetlights, his face looked kind, grandfatherly. "You asserted reality. There is a difference." He gestured toward a sleek vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom, idling at the curb. A driver stood by the door. "Can I offer you a ride home?" Michael asked. "Queens, right?" Katie blinked. "How did you know I live in Queens?" Michael smiled. "I heard you talking to the other server earlier, about the train delays on the 7 line. I have excellent hearing." Katie hesitated. She had been taught never to get in cars with strangers, but Michael Sterling didn't feel like a stranger. He felt like an inevitability. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." They settled into the plush leather seats of the car. The interior was silent, insulated from the city noise. "So," Michael said as the car pulled away from the curb, "tell me about the subjunctive." Katie looked at him confused. "The grammar." "You didn't just learn that on Duolingo." Michael chuckled. "That was academic French, high-level philology." "Who are you, Katie Miller?" Katie looked out the window at the blurring lights. "I'm nobody. Just a student." "Details." Michael pressed gently. "I'm a doctoral candidate at Columbia." Katie admitted, her voice quiet. "I'm in my final year. My thesis is on the sociolinguistic impact of class structures in 18th century France, specifically how language was used as a gatekeeping mechanism by the aristocracy." Michael laughed, a genuine hearty laugh. The irony is delicious. You used his own weapon against him. You realized he was using language to exclude you, so you used a higher form of that same language to exclude him. "He was just being a bully," Katie said. "He didn't know the rules of the game he was playing." "And you did?" Michael grew serious. "Why are you working at the Obsidian Room, Katie? If you are that close to a PhD, surely there are grants, fellowships." Katie looked down at her hands. The shame returned hot and sharp. "My mother got sick last year," she said. "Cancer, the insurance. It covers some, but not the specialized treatments. I lost my grant because I had to take time off to care for her. The tuition waivers stopped. I needed cash. Fast. Waiting tables at a high-end place was the only way to make rent and pay the hospital bills." Michael nodded slowly. He didn't offer pity. He offered understanding. "Talent trapped by circumstance," he mused. "The greatest tragedy of our economic system." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the leather notebook he had been writing in at the restaurant. He opened it to a blank page and uncapped a fountain pen. "I have a foundation, Katie, the Sterling Institute. We do a lot of work in Europe. Diplomatic relations, cultural preservation, historical archiving. We deal with documents and people that require a precise understanding of language and context." He scribbled something on the paper, tore the page out, and handed it to her. It was a phone number. And a salary figure. Katie looked at the number. Her breath hitched. The salary was 4 times what she made at the restaurant in a good year. It was enough to pay off the medical bills in 6 months. It was enough to save her mother. "I don't need a waitress," Michael said, looking her in the eye. "I need a linguistic analyst. I need someone who can listen to what is being said, and more importantly, what is not being said. Someone who can stand in a room full of arrogant men and not blink." "Mr. Sterling," Katie stammered. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Michael said simple. "Report to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring your CV, and bring your mother's medical invoices. The foundation has a comprehensive health plan that kicks in on day 1. Katie felt tears prick her eyes again. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet," Michael said, his expression darkening slightly. "You need to know something about men like Preston Holloway." Katie stiffened. "What?" "I humiliated him tonight," Michael said. "I took his toy the restaurant, and I took his deal. Men like Preston don't learn lessons. They hold grudges. He has resources, and he is petty. He will come after you." "Me?" Katie asked. "But I'm just—" "You are the symbol of his failure," Michael corrected. "He can't attack me. I'm too big." "But you are the weak link. He will try to discredit you. He will try to get you expelled from Columbia. He will try to ensure you never work in this city." Katie felt a cold chill run down her spine. "What can he do?" "He can do a lot," Michael said. "But he is playing checkers. We are going to play chess." The car slowed down. They had arrived at a small, run-down apartment building in Queens. Michael turned to her. "Go upstairs. Hug your mother. Sleep. Tomorrow, the real work begins. We are going to build a wall around you that Preston Holloway cannot breach. But you must be brave." "Are you brave, Katie?" Katie thought of the way she had stood up at the table. She thought of the perfect French sentences leaving her mouth. She thought of her mother's tired smile. She looked at Michael Sterling. "I can be," she said. "Good." Katie opened the door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. She watched the Rolls-Royce pull away, disappearing into the night. She looked down at the piece of paper in her hand. The salary. The future. She felt hope for the first time in years. But as she turned to unlock the front door of her building, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. A text message. "Unknown number." She opened it. The message was a picture. It was a photo of her taken just minutes ago, getting into Michael Sterling's car. The caption below it read, "Nice sugar daddy. Would be a shame if the Dean of Columbia saw this and thought you were trading favors for scholarships. Watch your back, waitress." Katie dropped the phone. It clattered onto the concrete. Preston wasn't waiting until morning. The war had already started. Katie didn't sleep that night. The text message burned on her screen like a brand. Trading favors for scholarships. It was a lie so dirty, so cliché, yet so destructive. The next morning, she walked into the Sterling Institute's headquarters, a limestone townhouse on the Upper East Side that whispered, "Old money." She found Michael in his library sipping tea. She silently handed him her phone. Michael looked at the picture. He looked at the threat. Then he let out a dry chuckle. "He is predictable," Michael said, sliding the phone back. "He thinks this is a scandal. He doesn't realize it's a trap." "A trap?" Katie asked, her voice trembling. "He's going to ruin my reputation before I even defend my thesis." "No," Michael corrected. He is going to try, and in doing so he will expose himself. Michael tapped a remote on his desk. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. It displayed a paused video feed. It was high-definition security footage from inside the obsidian room. The angle was perfect. It showed Table 4 Preston's sneering face and Katie standing tall. The audio was crystal clear. "When I bought the building last night," Michael said, "I acquired all assets, including the security servers. I own the tapes, Katie." 2 hours later, Preston Holloway posted the photo of Katie entering the Rolls-Royce on X, formerly Twitter tagging Columbia University, and several tabloids with a caption implying an illicit affair. 10 minutes after that, the official Sterling Trust account released the full unedited video of the dinner service. The caption was simple: "True class cannot be bought." Watch a doctoral candidate school a bully in 18th century French syntax. The internet did the rest. By noon, the video had 4 million views. The comments weren't talking about a sugar daddy. They were talking about Katie's flawless accent. They were talking about Preston's rudeness. They were translating her insults and making memes of Preston's shocked face. The narrative flipped instantly. Preston wasn't the whistleblower. He was the villain in a viral drama of his own making. By 2 p.m. the board of Auratech called an emergency meeting. The stock was dipping not because of a waitress, but because the CEO looked weak, petty, and unhinged. The German investors, led by Mr. Weber, publicly announced they were pulling out of the deal, citing ethical incompatibility. Katie didn't check her phone for the rest of the day. She was too busy filling out paperwork for her mother's transfer to Mount Sinai Hospital's top oncology wing, fully covered by the Sterling Foundation. 6 months later, Katie stood at a podium in a lecture hall at Columbia. She was wearing a graduation gown. She had just successfully defended her dissertation. She was now Dr. Katie Miller. As she walked out into the sunlight, she saw a man sitting on a bench near the campus gates. He looked thinner. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a button-down shirt and slacks. It was Preston. He saw her and stood up. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked tired. He had been ousted as CEO 3 months prior. "Katie," he said. Katie stopped. She didn't feel fear. She didn't feel anger. She felt nothing. Preston started, then trailed off. He looked at the ground. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Katie said simply. "I wanted to say," Preston struggled with the words. "You're subjunctive. It was correct." Katie looked at him, then smiled. It wasn't a mean smile. It was a smile of finality. "I know," she said. "Au revoir, Preston." She walked past him, her heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement, walking toward the black car, waiting for her, not as a servant, but as the master of her own fate. Preston Holloway learned the hard way that a uniform doesn't define a person's worth, and money doesn't buy intelligence. He saw a waitress and assumed she was nothing. He didn't realize he was standing in the presence of a queen in disguise. In the end, it wasn't his money that destroyed him. It was his own arrogance. Katie proved that the most powerful weapon isn't a bank account. It's dignity, education, and the courage to speak up when it matters most. I hope you enjoyed this story of justice served cold. If you did, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And here is a question for you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone because of your job or how you looked? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and remember, treat everyone with respect, because you never know who you're really talking to.